hiding in plain sight is actually a pretty simple thing to do. And it's a way to operate as an intelligence agent out in the open, and a way to invisibly influence the minds of those who are open to it for the better. Something I discovered many, many years ago, and I watched the shift in how information was distributed. So there was a point in time in which, out of 700 million active websites in the world, from between 2013 and 2014, where one of my websites, eym.hypnoathletics.com, was getting between 80 and 160,000 visitors per day. And it was ranked in the top between 100,000 and 400,000 most visited websites in the world. Again, out of 700 million active websites. And at that time, a shift began to happen. One of these things was there was a software called Quick Blogcast. And the really amazing thing about this software called Quick Blogcast was that it was a tool that allowed me to sign people up for instant alerts for whenever I posted a blog on the website. And it made it so user-friendly that I was amassing readers and followers. I was amassing readers and followers at a really fast rate. Pretty much almost everyone that I met at a coffee shop or out in the streets, just wherever I was teaching classes, would sign up. And the way that Quick Blogcast would work was I could go up to people that I was talking to, or I could go up to people and talk to them, or if I was already speaking to them, they knew me from before, and I was excited about my blogging endeavors, and I would right there and then ask them, hey, would you like to sign up and receive alerts from my email, for my blog? And when they said yes, I said, well, you can type in your email right here, or give me your email right now. And they would give me their email. Either sometimes if I didn't have my device open or whatever, I would ask them to write it down. And I would tell them, you're going to get an email that's going to ask you to confirm, because this is the way it worked, that if someone put an email in their field, in the sign-up field, then it would send, and they hit enter, it would send them an email to follow up and ask, did you do this? Would you like to receive email alerts when a blog is published? And they would have to click affirmative. Sometimes people did that while they were standing there right in front of me. Some of them did it while they were online, because a lot of people that I met were actively working on their computers and reading and stuff like that. And so I'm going to insert some conspiracy theory paranoia stuff sounding here, but that product, when I started to, and I'm not saying it's only because of me, maybe someone else discovered this too, and this has to do with the change of information and becoming invisible, is that within that time when I discovered that, and my website was getting so much traffic, all of a sudden Quick Blogcast was completely taken away with no explanation. And what was even stranger about it is that when I would call GoDaddy, who were the owners or the licensees of that software at the time and ask them what happened, I would get stonewalled over and over and over again. People would say, I don't know what happened. We didn't get any notification of this. I would, I pleaded with them. I said, who's the developer? Who created it? Who can I email and get? I will pay that person. I want to find out who can I license that software from. Where did it go? No one can tell me. It's just all of a sudden, thousands of subscribers just completely gone in an instant with zero warning from GoDaddy at all. Just all of a sudden, completely zeroed out. And because if you don't know anything about email marketing or internet marketing, one of the biggest things, a lot of marketers who are in the know use the Groupon example, that building an email list is one of the few things that you can do to build an online book of business that is yours wherever you go. When you keep a spreadsheet, something that you can download and take with you no matter what. If you get banned from social media or your website gets taken down, at least you have your email list, because you can then reach back out to those people later. I remember learning things about marketing and doing tests about it and getting instant results. For example, I remember I did a campaign, and I know it's buried somewhere in the notes in the university.hypnoathletics blog, but where some of the guys from Empower Network, or maybe it was Ryan Dice or somebody from Magnetic Marketing, from Dan Kennedy, one of these marketers that I was learning from, and they talked about writing shocking emails, and it was like these shock and awe campaigns, or these different pattern interruption, they would call them. And I remember one title in particular was something like, why should I keep you on my email list, or whatever, or why shouldn't I delete you from my email list, or something like that. And I remember crafting this email and doing the copywriting for it and sending it out, and people the next day at the gym, even my group fitness manager came up to me and talked to me and said, hey, I would love to stay on your list. Please don't, delete me. It was amazing, the response that at that time I was getting from email campaigns. And so, again, keep in mind, I started this off talking about being invisible and operating as an invisible intelligence agent or an invisible influencer online, and how to become invisible and operate in obscurity. Relatively. It's about having a cult underground following that can't be stopped. And so the whole debacle with the quick blogcast product, and the fact that I still remember it, this was 2013, mind you. So this is 13 years ago, and I still feel the trauma of losing quick blogcast, and have never been able to find anything like it since then. You'll know that various different marketing software exists, but none of it was as elegant and simple as using quick blogcast. Once again, you could simply ask somebody to put their email in this field, and hit enter, and immediately an email would be sent to them asking if they want to continue to receive emails. They would have to they would have to affirm that they wanted to, or confirm that they wanted to receive those emails. So it was a two-tier process. One, they put the email in, hit enter, and then once they receive the email in their inbox, then they would have to confirm that they in fact do want to receive these. And after that, anytime I published a blog, they would get it, and a lot of people were reading them. And I still am not very savvy at tracking. I don't actually look at a lot of my metrics, not all the time. Sometimes I do, and I do a lot of other different things, but it was pretty interesting. So from that time forward, a huge shift started to happen. A lot of companies that were pretty radical, that were actually teaching people like myself how to reach our audiences and how to pattern interrupt, and learning copywriting from Dan Kennedy and Ryan Dice and Russell Brunson, and all these guys out there that were in magnetic marketing and attraction marketing, where basically the idea was to, instead of you chasing clients and chasing readers, having them come to you just by the things that you were posting and publishing, in ways of using SEO and all these different things. And so some companies folded. There were like internal struggles. Different software was banned. Google started de-indexing things. I mean, Alexa, which was a site that you could use for free to track how many visits your site was getting and what its rank was in the world, which is what I was using. It got bought by another company, and then instead stopped being a free service and became a paid service where you weren't able to access it for free and just simply type in your website and check anymore. And so and around that time, 2013, 2014, 2015, somewhere around there, things just started to shift. And what would happen is, if you were a real person who had good intentions and were actually creating information that was going to be helpful for people without being spammy, without selling them fake shiny objects like weird supplements and things that really didn't work, and all these quick fixes and shortcuts and all this nonsense, when you're actually giving people real practical information about fitness and exercise, about real things that they can do that didn't require chemistries and surgeries and prescriptions, when it talked about movement and flexibility and mobility and range of motion and strength and power, and you were really giving people practical information, those things would slowly have their reach become eroded. If you were teaching people about their subconscious mind and about how it could be manipulated, or even if you weren't using that kind of negative bent and you were simply talking about how you can take control of your mind, and this is how the subconscious mind works, and that clinical hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming and something that I created called synaptic syntax sequencing can be effective, and you can really control your behavior by controlling your own thoughts, that stuff would have its awareness and reach become eroded. When you were teaching people spiritual practices and you were talking about metaphysical concepts that were helping them become more emotionally confident and connected to the world and others around them, and to focus on how they can love themselves and allow that to spill out and be more kind, and what I call LUCK, an acronym LUCK, which is, to show more love, understanding, compassion, and kindness. And even though it might be difficult, that's what to strive for. And when you're putting out that information, body, mind, and spirit information that was actually practical, helpful, and real, and not gimmicky, spammy, fake, and only in it, people were only in it just to make money, that stuff was having its reach and awareness become eroded more and more as time went on. And I noticed it at that time. Now, maybe there was already, so there were forces and processes already in motion. I can't say that I'm responsible for that, but I was part of that movement that was creating this information, just raw, boots on the ground people like me who were in it. We were actually doing this stuff. We weren't just people who decided, I'm going to try to make a business and make money and then look around and steal other people's ideas and then only use the stuff and the words and the tactics that were fake, the clickbait and the things that would just get people to click and buy without any substance behind it. Whereas Dan Kennedy, for example, he would say things like, look, as a business owner or an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, whatever, an independent contractor, somebody who's in business for themselves, a sole proprietor. Anytime that you are running some kind of business where you have a service and or a product that you are giving to people in exchange for their money, he said it is your duty to make them aware of this product or service and to get them to buy it. And he says, before that, he says, now it's a really good idea to make something that is actually valuable, or to use the words of Earl Nightingale from The Strangest Secret, something that is wanted, needed, and useful, right? So therefore valuable. It's a good idea to create a really good product. And then it is your duty to make sure that you sell that product to people, that you give it to them in exchange for their money at the highest price that you can get it for. Because if it has real value, people will pay whatever it is for you to solve their problem or do something for them. He says, but past beyond that, unless you do follow-up or you do private coaching or other sessions to help them to fulfill it, he says it's not your duty to get them to take off the shrink wrap. And that was, language that he used because he literally was a direct marketer, and he did snail mail campaigns, postal campaigns, where he would send people DVDs and CDs and cassette tapes and things like that, and they would actually have to take the shrink wrap off, that plastic stuff that keeps the packages sealed. They would have to rip open the envelope and pull out the shrink wrapped media bundle that had the newsletter and the DVDs and or CDs and things like that, or tapes or whatever it was inside there. They would have to open it. That's taking off the shrink wrap part. He says you can't make them to do that. You can encourage them, like I said, with like different follow-up, different courses, different coaching sessions, private calls, things like that. But a lot of people were then taking those tactics, which admittedly, and Russell Brunson, if you see some of his commercials and his ads, he bought magnetic marketing and its intellectual properties, including the No BS newsletter from Dan Kennedy. He has ads now that will show you that, Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who was, I don't know if he tells this detail, but, he was part of the Committee for Public Information with a guy named Walter Lippmann. He was known as the father of public relations, and they used all these different hypnotic, brainwashing, Machiavellian, mind control techniques to get sales. And Dan Kennedy was okay with using that, but his caveat was that if you're going to do that, make sure you're making something that is actually really tried and true, tested, and is actually going to help people when they get it. He says, what's the point of making something and creating something and selling it to people if it's going to be BS, if it's not actually going to help them? He's like, you don't need to scam people. That's how you only make one-time sales. Anyway, it's not good for business. It's not good for business at all if you con people, which is the difference of using these persuasive techniques. The difference between being a scammer and doing good business is whether or not the product and or service that you persuade people to buy from you is actually valuable to them and will help them to solve their problem. So that's the point. But a lot of people were taking these techniques of persuasion, which I'm using as a neutral term because it can be used for good or ill, obviously. And we're just selling people junk, just scamming people with these, websites that had these money back guarantees and all these seals that they probably made up and whatever, but just to get people to buy their products en masse and then disappear later. Or if, they got shut down for whatever reason, then they could claim, well, we got shut down, we can't send you your money back or whatever, or just would completely ghost people. And so that became prevalent, and that was pushed more and was supported by what people would now say is the algorithm. Whereas the things that were actually wanted, needed, and useful, the things that were actually valuable, the things that actually helped people to solve their problems, those things were having their awareness and reach eroded. And so now you enter the phase where people who were doing that, such as myself, started to become more and more invisible. And it was noticeable. And it's not something that there were a lot of complaints about, unless you were like a whiny person that wasn't solution oriented and really weren't in doing what you're doing for the long haul. It's an opportunity to see that now you can operate in somewhat of an obscurity, from the shadows in a way. You become a shadow operative. And because people will know for sure when they consume the content, the product and or service that you create for them, and it is actually valuable to them and helps them to solve their problem, it makes their lives better in some way, they remember that and they know that, especially if it's something that they really need and that they're going to use. So they will continually find you and go to you no matter what, even though the algorithm is pushing other things at them and doing its best to distract them for all these shiny objects and waving all of these things in their face and making all these promises that are not true. And that's essentially where we are now. And a lot of people are using what could be a very neutral tool, which actually is in many ways, unless you look at some of the programming biases of these tools. But artificial intelligence can be wielded and has great power when used in a certain way to be able to amplify your reach. But it is being co-opted by bad actors, if you will. I don't know why that term just came to my head, but for some reason, some weird looking politician, nondescript, nobody in particular, just popped into my mind saying bad actors. But people who are unscrupulous, these scoundrels, which every time I hear that, I use that word, it reminds me of Ice-T, the rapper now turned actor, because I've heard him use that term before, and the way he said it was hilarious to me. But these scoundrels, are now out there using these techniques still, because they were using them before, to swindle people into turning over their hard-earned money for what they think is going to help them with these promises of these quick fixes and shortcuts, but then they disappear. Which again, if you just want to make a quick buck and run away with people's money, that's how you do it, but you're not going to get repeat business and you're not going to build up a good reputation. And so what has happened now is that there are a lot of people who are operating based on word of mouth and reputation, which is good when people know that you're giving good stuff. A good example of this is that a large majority of the listeners to my podcast, I have no idea who they are, or if I do, they're not telling me. But what I do know is that every once in a while when I look at the stats, there's a large amount of people reading or consuming my content in general. Because I get alerts from ResearchGate, for example, that says you've got 700 reads of your research, or Spreaker sends me things and you've unlocked a new achievement. This podcast has reached 100 downloads, or various things like that. I'll just start to see your rankings on IMDb. When I look at it, Star Meter has the ranking in place is getting closer. The number's getting lower, which means your star meter is your visibility is becoming higher. And just different things like that I see every once in a while, or people telling me about things that I've done, just coming up to me, hey, I read this, or I've had a couple of people recently cause me to actually really narrow in and define the genre that I'm writing in now, but say that I've had to start to look up these words and get smarter to read your writing. And so I looked it up, and I did a little bit of research, and so my writing falls into literary fiction or literary speculative fiction. Literary being, that you have to have a sophisticated level of literacy in order to not just understand, but to follow the concepts and the style, the metaphysics and the technology and the physics and things that I'm writing about, and how I'm framing it and how I'm speaking about things like consciousness and things like that. So it's I'm writing literature. Who would have known? Who would have thought? But so I get feedback, objective analysis of my output. And so that is a good thing to me. And because one of the things that I'm still doing is speaking to people one-on-one. I was just now in a pet store. Every once in a while I go in there and I buy crickets for my jumping spider, who I still haven't given her a name. And there was a guy in there that I had met before, and I talked to him about playing capoeira. He's never done any martial arts, but he would like to, and he thought it would be interesting. And, gave him my business card a couple weeks ago. We talked. But that's how it is. That's how I still connect with people, one-on-one, face-to-face. Even though I'm building out the infrastructure and system that is automating a lot of my actual sales. So the actual transactions are being automated. Whereas I don't have to be there, where I've set up systems where in actual fact, I make money in my sleep, as people attempt to say. And some of the things that they want to sell you is saying, oh, you can make money on autopilot or passive income. When really, a lot of this is really semi-passive. You're not doing nothing. Even if you are just a figurehead, part of your job then is acting, right? So, everything is okay with that. There are figureheads of all kinds. There are figureheads of nations, of companies, people who are not really actually pulling the strings, but are the face, right? The spokesperson. And that's falls under the category of, public relations. They all have their place. But, that's still not completely 100% passive. I suppose there are some things that can be, but still, keeping up a reputation, whether it's good or bad, you're doing something. I don't know, even if it's you just being you. I've heard that some people just disappear from the public eye, and then people become more curious and hunt for them even more and more. So I don't know. I disappear from certain places sometimes. As a matter of fact, it was really interesting to find that there's a place that I would go to often. And I remember the last time that I was actually there, it was December 20th of 2025. And the first time I went back was on a Sunday, which was March 1st of 2026. So it was over 2 months that I'd been there. When I walked in, people's faces were surprised. And one of the people at the front turned and said something to somebody else. And other people came in and were like, hey, I haven't seen you for a long time. And are you going to be here for a while? And I asked why. Oh, so-and-so is going to be here. And I was like, why would they mention that person's name? And then when that person came in with somebody else, the other person said to me, they were like, hey, we were wondering where you were. And I said something just like, sure. And she said, well, so-and-so. And I was like, huh, interesting. It's funny to learn that being you sometimes just has an influence on people. But that can be seen as a good thing when people are glad that you're back, which was also something that was said. Well, I'm so glad to see you again. I'm glad that you're here. That's, you shouldn't live for that unless you can't help it. Some people can't help it. Some people live for other people's validation, but it does feel nice. It does. But I can do with or without it, which is one of the reasons why I went on my little pilgrimage in the first place. I was only around people when it was absolutely necessary for doing the work that I was doing. And I wasn't going to any places. I wasn't sitting down anywhere for any long period of time, reading books. I wasn't writing anywhere. I was driving, traveling. Anytime I stopped going to cafes to read and write, everything I was doing was either at a park by myself or in my car. Completely isolated and alone. A lot of times I would pull up to a place where I could see the ocean in front of me, and I would just sit at the beach and just write, eat, drink some coffee or tea or whatever, and then just spend that time by myself like I'm doing right now. I'm parked in the shade of some trees not too far from the beach. I was actually going to go to the beach, but I got a little distracted by this thought in my mind and decided to just get it out for a moment. But and so this has to come back again to what I originally started, was about delivering information from a very strong foundation of, and I know these are catchwords that people throw around, but from a very strong foundation of integrity, right? And, integrity, if we really want to break down the word and why it's used in the way that it is that it comes from the words that share with, integrated. And integrated indicates when things are coming together, right? And they fit together. Sort of like how the legs of a stool fit together in a way where they're equidistant. If there are 3 of them or even 4, right? Doesn't matter, 3 or 4 legs, they have to be in an equidistant from each other to create stability. And that's what integrity means, is that you when pressure is put on it, it doesn't just fall apart easily, because those parts are put together. They've come together in the right way. They're not just thrown together willy-nilly, which shows that it has no real strong foundation or base of support. And so integrity really has to do with things coming together because they belong together. It's not just that bait and switch where people are making promises that they can't actually deliver on. But when you are coming from that place of integrity, even though a lot of people get discouraged because sometimes a lot of people are observing the wrong metrics, or are approaching things from an unstable perspective. So a lot of people are basing what they're doing solely and only on the pursuit of money. And I do understand where people are coming from with that, because in the way that the world is structured, obviously money is required to do many of the things that we need to do. It's one of the reasons why the websites that I've mentioned, I've had to pay for those mostly out of my own pocket for the last 20 years. It's the 20th year anniversary now of my first website that went online, which is eym.hypnoathletics.com. It's when I registered HypnoAthletics, and exercisingyourmind.com. They've been online for 20 years. Exercising Your Mind 2007, so next year will be its 20th. And so the integrity is really in large part the mindset that you have and how you're approaching it. Because if you're in it just for the money, which is not a problem, but it's more difficult sometimes when you're approaching it from that, because sometimes you tend to take shortcuts, and those shortcuts affect the quality of what you're putting out there. When I'm talking about quality, I'm not talking about like production value, because you can have a high production value of a crappy product or service. I mean, things can be dressed up in a certain way. Things can look a certain way. Things can have a certain form on the outside. It can be superficial, but what you get is nonsense. You can wrap a dollar store, I don't know if they sell watches there, but you can wrap a dollar store watch, if they sell them there, in a Tiffany's bag. And a Tiffany's bag might be more, I don't know, expensive than the watch itself. I don't know how much Tiffany bags cost. and give that to a person, and the watch may or may not fall apart depending on, and I'm saying dollar store. What I'm really meaning is you can put a poorly constructed or poorly assembled piece of technology, a bad watch, just a low quality watch in what is perceived as a high quality bag, and sell that to people because it's in a Tiffany bag at a high price, but they're actually paying a high price for a low quality product. And a lot of that is going on. Once again, that's not integrity. Or you can really create something that you know that works, or at least you believe it works because it has worked for you and it's been tested in a certain way, and you're truthfully putting that out there, believing and knowing that it actually really is going to work, rather than just believing and knowing that you can sell it. And that's integrity. Because even if it doesn't work for the people, at least you put it out there with the intention that it did, and you can at least communicate with people and not run away because you know that you just threw out a bunch of crap just to get their money. You know that you can now communicate with them and say, hey, how about we tweak it this way? This is actually what I actually did. Did you do such and such? And you can have a correspondence, an interaction. But that's when you come from integrity. That's one of the only ways that you have that kind of leverage, to have that correspondence. And so one of the things, and I'll land this here, that one of the results of that is when you do good quality work, it doesn't matter how long you go away. When you come back, you're still welcomed. For some reason, even though it doesn't have the same meaning, but the Creed song comes to mind. With arms wide open. With arms wide open. People will greet you with arms wide open, like the place that I said that I visited frequently, and then I disappeared for over 2 months and went back, and everybody was really genuinely pleased to see me. And I mean, there was one guy who works there who sat after his shift and spoke to me for like 45 minutes. Another guy who I hadn't seen for a while and didn't even say hello to him at first, but then went out to the park where he was playing soccer and kicked the ball around a little bit and did some martial arts moves. And he actually sat with me for another hour and a half before he left. And then several of the other people sat and talked to me and had conversations with me. And it was just very interesting. It was almost like they were really genuinely glad that I was there. Some of them have read my books or some of the other things online or listened to my music, but that's how I left it. See, when you actually deliver something from a place from a strong foundation, and you really are a genuine, real person, that's what you go back to. I mean, I have examples of this where I left Florida in the end of 2002 when I really didn't want to. I was at the height of my beginning of my career in the art department, working with a guy named Jerry Bloom, who at the time had a company called Miami Art Department, which then became Miami Props or something like that. I don't know if it was Miami Props first or Miami Art Department, but either way, now it's Miami Prop Rentals, to the point where I hadn't seen this guy since 2002, talk to him every once in a while on the phone, but then go back there in 2022. I said, this is 20 years later, and he says, oh, I'm in luck, you're in luck. Actually, I think I might have worked with him in 2014 or something like that, 2015. Something like that. Yeah, it was, because I remember I was with Floor, and we went down there. Yeah, and that's when he said, I'm in luck, you're in. So still, 15 years later, let's say 13 years later, right? Go there, call him up. Jerry, this is Hakeem. I'm calling to let you know 2 reasons. I'm in town, and I'm available to work. And he says, well, I'm in luck, because I'm in luck, you're in luck. I got work coming up, and he told me a story about, how it was just so fortuitous, and it was just right at the right time. And anyway, I went and worked with him for a little while until I left and went back to California and then went to China. So yeah, that was 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. Yeah, it was 2016. So yeah, about 14 years. And then, went away, went back to China, all kind of stuff in Virginia. And then went back. Now it's like 7 years later, right? 2023 from 2016. another 7 years, and then just go there and he just automatically puts me on. And that's over and over again. A client, Elizabeth from California, another guy, Sean. Whenever I show up, they're like, hey, stay at my house. Here's some money. Train me. Like, that's how I've left everything. That's what, I mean, if anything you get from what I've been saying this whole time is that, whatever that is that you leave quality behind. There's a lot of bridges that I burned, but because I wanted those bridges burned. And there's a lot of people that don't associate with me. And I say this with great confidence because they're just nasty people. I mean, my friend Donald Dias, I also hadn't seen him for a long time. I left in 2000, and the last time I saw him was in 2016. And I got back to California in 2022, 2023, greeted me with arms wide open. Went to see him perform at an open mic. We hung out and talked, and it's like that all the time. So him and various other people, every time I go to a place, they're just like, hey, a woman that I hadn't seen for years, since like high school. I hadn't seen her since like 1996. It was like 30 years later, almost. And spent hours just hanging out with her, sitting there talking, eating food, just what, and that's, I'm realizing, because as bad as sometimes I feel and as depressed as I have gotten and angry as I've been a lot of times, I didn't take that out on other people intentionally. And a lot of times the people, there are some things that are my fault. I'm not perfect. That's not what I'm claiming. There are some relationships that have ended because of things that I have done, lies that I have told, just stupid stuff that I've done, girlfriends that I wasn't faithful to, things like that. I'm not happy about. So this is not a claim to be perfect. I've screwed up a fair share amount of things on my own. But what I'm talking about is that I have this overall general, this underlying energy, this vibe that, as several of my group fitness instructors have said to me, that I'm well received wherever I go. And I've heard that in China as well. This, interesting enough, the same phrasing, you're very well received. I don't know if that's like a catchphrase of something, but and I would just, and there were like record breaking things that I would do over and over again wherever I would go. And it's a good break to take a sip of my tea. And to have this underlying, whereas, for example, and I'm just giving these examples, they're coming to mind, where I was written a letter of recommendation when I was the yoga advisor at Yoga Works, which unfortunately is no longer open for in-person studios. But the manager, she wrote me a letter of recommendation and a heartfelt letter when I left to go to China for the first time, and that she would miss me and that she hopes that I do my best and everything. And she was sincere. She was a really great lady. I mean, she was awesome. And I hated to disappoint her, but this opportunity to go to China with Floor presented itself, and so I needed to do that. And the organization that I worked at before, Fiesta Cantina, the manager was a really awesome guy, and I have stories to tell about him as well. John Bacalar, you're a great guy. Whatever you're doing, we're still friends on Facebook. I see him post stuff every once in a while, but wrote me a letter also and said that I'm going to make sure that I put into the company that I'm putting in rehire paperwork because you're leaving on the good terms. You gave the 2 weeks. You're doing what you're doing. He says that if you ever need a job, you're welcome to come back because you left in the right way. And great guy, stand-up guy, to the point where when I actually came back to the United States, after a lot of stuff happened, Floor passed away and all this other stuff, I was on my way to go there to get my job back, but then I got back on a plane and came to Virginia. And then even when I was going out there in 2023, I called him up and talked to him just to inquire and see if it was true. And the manager at the time called me back and said, yeah, in fact, we still have that paperwork is on file. You do have, you are welcome to come back. We're looking for people. I didn't end up doing it. Some other stuff happened, and I ended up coming back to the East Coast. But, you know, maybe if I do need something to get me started when I go back to California, if I do, I can go and do that. I mean, the point is not that I am going to do any of that stuff. Just that I leave in my wake my normal modus operandi. My MO is that my mode of operation, the way that I move, is that in my wake I leave things on good terms. Not because I'm not a nice person. I'm actually not. I'm not a nice person. I'm not just nice to be nice. I'm not a people pleaser. Believe it or not, I very rarely talk at length to people. Most people I don't. Some people just trigger that in me and I'll have lengthy conversations. But usually, and I do it actually many times very consciously, I don't say anything to anybody. Even if I'm directly doing some kind of interaction with them. And it causes people to start talking more and more and more to me, but I usually just look at them, smile, nod, and just carry out whatever interaction we're doing, and I leave. And it's because I really don't want to talk to a lot of people. Some of the vibes that I get from some people, I mean, they might be well-meaning and nice people. I just don't want to have anything to do with them. Not because I hate people, just I'm not that guy. I don't have that much to interact with some people with, especially when I know what some people are about. And I just don't want to get involved. And so I'm not a nice person. I'm not a people pleaser. And I'm not out there trying to, you know, make everybody feel happy and shiny people and hold their hands. So that's not it. What is it is that the interactions and the transactions that I engage in are designed to benefit all whom it affects, as much as I can control that. And again, Dan Kennedy will tell us that it's good for business as well. So it doesn't have to just be all just, you know, altruistic and goody two-shoes and people-pleasing. No. It's better for long-term business and just long-term relationships if you're not just doing asshole stuff to people. Period. Right? There's no reason to just go around swindling, because those are the people, the drifters who are grifters, right? Who just go from town to town just swindling people until they run out of places to go. I can actually go back to all the places that I've been and find good contacts and good relationships there. And if there was any point of me making this recording and putting this out as a podcast at all, it is to communicate that idea of being a shadow operative or a shadow intelligence operative or agent that is delivering things that are wanted, needed, and useful, that are valuable products and or services to the people that you reach out to, that you communicate with. And this is in all levels, because a lot of the people, for example, at these various different places and cafes and stuff that I go to that greeted me warmly when I went back, there was no business with them necessarily, unless, you know, I was buying coffee and food, right? But it wasn't about those transactions. They were happy to see me. Of course, I was happy to see them too, or else I wouldn't go back there. But that's the whole point. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, a lot of people aren't running a business or are not public figures. So, you know, they can just be crappy to people and not go certain places, and they're not going to be seen everywhere. But for somebody like me, I guess I'm glad that I'm not infamous in that way. You know, when people see me coming, they're not running away. I can be intimidating. Again, it's like I said, I'm not a nice guy. And I don't smile and play with everybody. And I take up space. But the thing that has happened, that I began, the seed of this thought process, this stream of consciousness, was what I've observed of And maybe it can serve as an encouragement. But this underground dwelling of people like myself who are providing valuable services and products to people, but we're not the ones who have all the likes and follows and comments, which can be seen as vanity metrics because they're not actually measuring transactional. They're not measuring transactionality, if that's a term, right? They're not measuring, for example, that I sold 14 of my books to people in person. They're not measuring that the reads that I'm actually getting, and the fact that people are downloading my podcasts and reading my research that has metrics showing such things are happening that I'm not having anything to do with directly. I created it once, put it there, and left it and went about my business doing other stuff like this. And so I know that this recording, this talk, this monologue is going to get a decent amount of reach simply because of what I've learned, how I've learned to amplify my voice using AI and how to leverage it to get that result. And it's something that I'm doing more of now, which I haven't been before. But it's about that time. I now have 2 decades of being online. I've built up more and more confidence than even when I started with confidence. And there's more and more now. I've evolved as a human being. I've worked out a lot of my kinks. I've got a lot of my, and when I say kinks, people don't, we're not talking about raunchy stuff, even though there's nothing wrong with being a little sexy here and there, but I'm talking about like when people talk about kinks in a rope, like a knot, and I'm talking about like little stupid faults, right, that get in the way, that cause friction. You know, a lot of those things I've worked out. I've become a lot more clear on my vision and what I'm doing. Maybe I'm a late bloomer, and that's fine, because it's better to be a late bloomer than to not bloom at all or not have that opportunity. That just kind of hit me hard when I thought about Flor, because her name means flower in Spanish. They even called her that in China, Hua, which was flower. And she there was a lot of blooming she had left to do. And I would just have very much loved for her to be here blooming with me. So, but it's so, I think that being a late bloomer is better than not continuing on to bloom at all. And that the things that I'm experiencing now that seem like overnight successes have a lot to do with seeds that I planted 2 decades ago. And yeah, you'll hear stories about, you know, kids who are getting their PhDs at 12 years old and becoming billionaires at 16 and all this other stuff like that. And then people get the idea that this necessarily needs to happen to them when they forget about the Colonel Sanders and the Sam L. Jacksons and the Louise Hayes of the world who, you know, in their 60s, 70s, you know, 40s, didn't become well-known or successful financially, as if that's the only metric of success. It's not. But not until those later years. And now they get to live out the rest of their life doing that. One of my claims to fame and success is that I've proven the taglines of my website, exercisingyourmind.com, that great health is the truest of all wealth. To the fact that now being 49 years old, I literally am still doing backflips and 540-degree sidewinder barrel roll spins through the air, which in capoeira is called a roda parafuso, or wheel screw, literally. And am doing tornado kicks and jumping, running, climbing, squatting, lifting, just doing all this kind of stuff because my body is completely healthy and mobile, flexible, endurant, strong, letting me do all these things. And I'm enjoying my life so much more because of it. I have so much more ability to sit and read for hours, even though I do get up and pace a lot. I don't just sit for a long time in one spot. Sometimes I do get caught up doing that, but I do have just as many times where I'm out and about, mobile, walking, lifting, squatting, running, doing all these things, and my body and my mind and my spirit are so much better for it, which is the whole foundation of Shaolin. When Bodhidharma went to China, saw the monks had weak and lazy bodies, and he taught them martial arts and yoga, and that's what helped them to be able to meditate longer and then experience states of enlightenment at a higher percentage because of the fact that they were able to control their bodies more. And I gave a very, very, very abbreviated version of that, but that's essentially what it is. And so overall, the idea is to build what you're building with integrity, with truth, make it real, be in it for the long term. And you'll hear a lot of people too who are doing great things that are like, look, I'm not ever going to retire. I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing till I die because I'm passionate about it. I may not love every single day of it or love everything that I have to do all the time, but in general, what I'm doing, it inspires me, it motivates me, and I'm just disciplined. And that's why I keep going, because I feel like I have no other choice to do this, because the other choice is just to lay down and die and be even more depressed and angry and hurt and just regretful. And I don't want that. Any of the anger and depression and anything else that I feel right now is simply because I'm a little bit impatient sometimes, because my mind thinks at a rate that the physical world my body just cannot keep up with. And also other people in the world, my pace is just ridiculous. And that's fine. And that's why I'm able to create and do so much. So, build from a strong foundation. Create things that are valuable. And make sure that people know about it. The right people. The people who matter to you. The people who you want to share things with. And eventually, on its own, that will continue to thrive and continue to have the reach. And you yourself will, in fact, be more fulfilled that you're doing something meaningful. You're doing meaningful work. It means something to you. That some people would say you're leaving behind a legacy. Even though you may not be the most well-known or famous or anything like that, it doesn't matter. What matters are that you feel really good, because this is the truth. People say this all the time, and you might think that people are just saying it, but it really does matter that you know that you have integrity, that you know that you're doing the right thing, that you know that you're actually helping people and you're actually creating things that have real value in the world, because that's where the real impact is left. That's what matters. So that, like I said, wherever I go, people aren't running out of the way to avoid me. They're embracing me, literally and figuratively. And that's good, because as I said before, I don't need that validation, but it's good that they're still open to receiving whatever it is that I'm offering. And if we're just looking at it transactionally in business, what more could you ask for? To have repeat customers that are asking, what have you got? Take my money. You've got my attention. You're here. You've got my attention. I've been waiting for you to come back, or I've been searching for what you're doing. What's up? What you got? And that is the thing that goes far. But ultimately, it has a lot to do with your perspective and mindset, which a lot can be said of that, about personal development. But that's how I started. I created this tagline that said, hypnoathletics is exercising your mind towards universal harmony and spiritual wisdom through healthy living and self-defense. And that's been the underlying. And I have a much longer affirmation or manifestations monologue, I don't even know what you'd call that goes along with it, but it's founded on that idea. Exercising your mind towards universal harmony and spiritual wisdom through healthy living and self-defense. I'm Hakeem Ali-Bocas Alexander.